In this video, I'll walk you through the settings that I would change in a brand new Supernote to get it ready to use, and explain a few possibly confusing items. For this video, I'll be using an A5X2 Manta, but the same thing should apply to the A6X2 Nomad. So after the initial setup and connecting to Wi-Fi and all that, you should have a nice blank note. And the first thing I'll do here is change a few things on the toolbar. The first is I change these three items to my most used pens. I personally like to have one in black, one in dark gray, and a highlighter. You can see the icon changes, so you can easily see and change between your favorite pen options while you're writing. Next thing is to change this icon, which is a hand pointing with one finger by default. These are the options for what triggers page turns, whether it's swiping with one or two fingers or just turning, swiping off altogether. Although turning this off does remove the possibility of accidentally turning a page with your hand, it's really annoying to have to use the buttons or whatever to turn pages. So I like setting this to 2 finger swipes, which cuts down on accidental turns, while still making page turning convenient. Next, I go into the 3 dots on the toolbar, then preferences, and I actually leave these settings at the default ones, but I do turn anti-aliasing on. What that does is slightly smooth out your writing after you write. It does use a little processing power, but I find that Supernote's way of doing this is not as overzealous as some other tablets that smooth out way too much. I like to leave it on just to make my writing a little bit smoother and neater. Next, also after tapping on these 3 dots, I go into gesture settings. And for these settings too, I mostly leave on the defaults. There's just whether you can show or hide the page number independently of the toolbar, and a gesture you can use to go back instead of a back button. But I make sure to switch this option to hide the exit full screen button. So the exit full screen button refers to this little icon here in the corner. That's a way to make the toolbar show again after you've hidden it. But since I just use the double finger tap to do that, I prefer hiding it. This way, when I hide the toolbar and the page number, there's really nothing extra on the page and I can focus on what I'm doing. Next, let's pull down from the top. So this is the quickest way to toggle your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and auto-rotate. And there are some other options here, but we can also click through to the device settings. The first item in the settings is where you can sign up for a Supernote account or sign into one if you have one, but it's not really necessary to use the device. The next item is where you can sign into things like Google Drive so you can sync your documents. I personally like using Google Drive, but I'll sign into mine off camera, of course. Same for signing into my Wi-Fi. Nothing really to change under my device, but more options here under display and input. You can change the font size of the interface on the device. I actually usually like it a little smaller, but I'll keep it at standard for this video to make it easier to see on camera. I like to go into languages and add any other languages that I know or I'm studying under language for handwriting recognition and for the keyboards. This makes it easier to type accents if needed and helps with handwriting conversion, for instance. Here I'm adding French and Portuguese. You don't actually have to look under calibration unless you're having problems with the non-contact writing, so that's when your pen is writing without touching the screen. It's nice to know in case that happens to you, you can try to fix it via software here. The Lamy side button setting also only applies if you're using a pen with a side button, even if it's something like the Kindle Scribe premium pen, for instance. It just lets you choose if that side button triggers an eraser or a lasso tool. Going back under gestures, you can choose your handedness and also set the gesture for activating the lasso and the eraser. So you have the option to set these to 2 fingers on the screen or 2 fingers on the slide bar opposite your dominant hand. So in this case, it would be the left slide bar since I'm right-handed. I personally like switching these two since I use the eraser way more than the lasso, and I like being able to just put 2 fingers kind of wherever to activate it. If you forget or don't know what the different gestures do, you can review them in this guide here. Under security, you can turn on password locks if you prefer. If you don't already know what sideloading is, don't turn this on. So sideloading refers to installing regular Android apps on your Supernote, but it's really not necessary to do. You'll even get a little warning if you try to turn this on. Don't worry, you'll be able to go on Kindle even without turning this option on. Next tab here is battery. An option called no load shutdown is on by default. I really like this feature and leave it on. Basically, if you're not actually writing, like you've set your pen down, the tablet goes into a low power mode, which you can wake it from by starting to write again. I find this generally works pretty well and saves enough battery that I set my auto sleep to something that's pretty long. I take a lot of meeting notes, so sometimes I'm kind of writing on and off, or sometimes I'm using this as reference for something. And when it goes to sleep, it locks screen and I just don't want to keep unlocking it. So it's more convenient if I can just start writing. Auto power off, I like setting to 24 hours or sometimes even never. For system, I actually turn this auto update option off and I just manually check when I know an update has been released if it's available to me. So I do the same thing on books, tablets, iPhones, other devices, just in case people report issues with an update. That way I can wait for those issues to be resolved before updating my device. Next, under apps, right now it's just there's the Atelier, the Supernote drawing focused app, and also the Kindle app, which is basically a version of Kindle for Android. So if you want to use either of those, just make sure to install them here. Next, we can go into customizing our sidebar to choose what apps show up and in what order. You can remove items you don't use or don't want to see, and then use the arrows here to move items up and down. Now these aren't really settings, but the last 2 tabs are a feedback page, which I have used before, the Contact Supernote, and the user manual for reference, so you can look up any features or functions that you're confused about or want to learn more about. For the next level of this, I will be making a video of how I organize my documents, the system I use, and so on my Supernote. But for now, get to know your new tablet and just start taking notes.